last week we heard the story of Joseph. Joseph is one of Sarah and Abraham's great-great-grandchildren. And Joseph was sold as a slave by his brothers to Egypt. But what his brothers intended for harm, God used for good. God allowed Joseph to interpret dreams. And Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dream. This dream warned everyone that there would be 7 good years, followed by 7 bad years. 7 years with lots of food, followed by 7 years with no food. So Joseph helped the Egyptians save up food during the 7 good years, so there would be plenty to eat during the 7 bad years. Joseph's brothers showed up in Egypt during the 7 bad years looking for food. Now Joseph could have stayed angry at his brothers, but he chose to forgive them. And he welcomed them into Egypt and gave them plenty of food to eat. Now Joseph and his brothers and lots of Sarah and Abraham's great-great-grandchildren stayed and lived and worked in Egypt for many, many years. Eventually, there was a new Pharaoh in Egypt. Now this new Pharaoh forgot that the Israelites were actually God's people. Here are the Israelites. He forgot all of the wonderful things that Joseph and his family had done for Egypt to help them save food. And he made the Israelites slaves. He wanted them to make bricks for all of his pyramids. The Israelites had to wake up when Pharaoh said wake up. They had to work when Pharaoh said work. They had to sleep when Pharaoh said sleep. The Israelites did not like being slaves. They wanted to be free. Eventually, there were so many Israelites that this new Pharaoh became afraid that the Israelites would take over Egypt and make all the Egyptians slaves and make the Egyptians make the bricks instead of the Israelites. So the Pharaoh, because he was so afraid, decided that all the firstborn, newborn baby boys in Israel needed to be killed. During this time, one of the mothers made a basket of bulrushes, and she took her newborn baby boy and she put him in the basket, and she covered him with reeds to hide him. And she pushed the basket out into the Nile River. A daughter of the Pharaoh found the baby, and she took him out, and she named him Moses. And she raised him as his own. So Moses grew up living in Pharaoh's house. When he grew to be a bit older, he realized that he was not really an Egyptian because he didn't look like an Egyptian. He looked like the Israelites. So he realized he was an Israelite. And one day he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite, and he became very angry. And Moses killed that Egyptian. Now Moses realized that he had sinned, so he ran away and hid in the desert. In the desert, he met a family, and Jethro was the dad, and he decided to live with Jethro and his family and become a shepherd. And he even married one of Jethro's daughters named Zipporah. And he lived in the desert for 40 years. One day, when he was caring for Jethro's sheep, he brought them to Mount Horeb. They called this mountain the Mountain of God. This day, he saw something very, very strange. He saw a bush that was burning, but did not burn up. God spoke to Moses through the bush, and he said, I have heard the cries of my people Israel who are slaves in Egypt. Go and set them free. But Moses said, who am I to do such a thing? And God said, I will be with you. And Moses said, what is your name? And God said, I am Yahweh. I am who I am. And Moses said, please send someone else. So God said, Aaron, your brother, will go with you, and he will speak for you. So Moses went all the way back to Egypt, and he went with his brother Aaron to see the Pharaoh. Moses said to the Pharaoh, let God's people go. The Pharaoh said, no. Moses went to him again and again, and he said, let God's people go. And Pharaoh kept saying, no. Many plagues fell over Egypt, and Pharaoh still said no. Eventually, something really sad and terrible happened. The oldest boy in each Egyptian family died. The oldest boys in the Israelite families were safe because they marked their doorways with lamb's blood, which told the angel of death to pass over their house. The Egyptian families were very sad. Even Pharaoh was sad because his oldest boy had died. Finally, Pharaoh said, yes, God's people can go. So God helped Moses by parting the Red Sea, so Moses could lead his people across the waters to freedom. And God closed the waters behind them, so the Egyptians could not come after them. Moses and Aaron led the people through the wilderness, or through the desert, for 40 years. God promised that he would lead his people to the promised land, which was going to be flowing with milk and honey. But after 40 years, they were not there yet. And we know that there's not a lot of food and water in the desert. So the people were hungry, and they were also thirsty and kind of discouraged. So they grumbled to Moses. God showed the people that he was still with them by giving them manna to eat that fell from the sky and quail. Now they had something to eat, but they were still thirsty. So God said to Moses, strike this rock with your staff, and water will flow out of it for the people to drink. So Moses struck the rock, and water did flow out of it. Later on, the people got thirsty again. This time God said to Moses, "Speak to the rock, and water will flow out of it for the people to drink." This time Moses did not trust God. He decided to strike the rock instead of speak to it, because that's what had worked last time. So Moses struck the rock, and water did flow out of it. But God spoke to Moses and he said, "I am angry. You did not trust me, and because of this, you will not get to enter the promised land like everyone else." Moses and the Israelites were just kind of wandering in the desert. It had been 40 years and they had not gotten to the promised land yet. They did not know the best way to live and the best way to go. So God decided to show them. God sent a pillar of fire by night and a cloud of smoke by day to show the people which way to go. God brought the people back to Mount Horeb. This is the same mountain where Moses had seen the burning bush. We also call Mount Horeb Mount Sinai. This time, it was so much covered with fire and smoke that Moses was the only one brave enough to climb it and meet God. Moses was gone a long time on the mountain, and the people began to think that Moses was not coming back. So they asked Aaron to make them a golden calf to worship instead. So all the women melted their golden jewelry together, and they formed it into a golden calf. Aaron presented the calf to the people and said, "Here is your new God." And all the people gathered round to worship the golden calf. They forgot the true God. They forgot the God who had led them out of Egypt into freedom. Just then, Moses came down from the mountain. His face was shining like the sun, and he was carrying with him 2 stone tablets. On these tablets, God had written the 10 best ways to live, which we also call the 10 Commandments. Moses saw what the people were doing, that they had made a golden calf and were worshiping it. He saw that they had become impatient and forgotten the true God, the God that had led them out of Egypt. So Moses threw the stone tablets down and broke them, and he threw the golden calf into the fire. The people were very sorry. And God forgave them, and he gave them 2 new stone tablets, and he wrote again on them the 10 best ways to live. God told Moses to have the people make a box. In this box, which they called the Ark, they could put the stone tablets in there and keep them safe. And this ark had 2 poles on the side so that they could carry it with them wherever they went. Then God told Moses to have the people make a tent called a tabernacle. And when they would stop to rest from their travels, they would put the ark in there, and God's glory would fill the tabernacle. Moses went into the tabernacle. And when he came out, his face was shining like the sun. we are going to hear the story of the tabernacle next week. After another 40 years of following the pillar of fire and the cloud of smoke through the wilderness, the people came to another mountain. This mountain was called Mount Nebo. And from Mount Nebo, you could see the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey that God had promised he would bring the Israelites to. Moses got to see the promised land, but he died before he got to go in, just like God had promised. Now, I wonder which part of this story you like the best. I wonder how Moses' mom felt when she put her baby in the basket. I wonder how Pharaoh's daughter felt when she found him and kept him and raised him as her own. I wonder how Moses felt all those years living as a shepherd when he ran away after he killed the Egyptian living in the desert. I wonder how Moses felt when God spoke to him through the burning bush and said to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. I wonder why the Pharaoh finally said yes, he would let God's people go. I wonder how the Israelites felt when they were able to walk right through the Red Sea and walk through the waters to freedom. I wonder how the Israelites felt once they had been in the desert 40 years and they were so hungry and thirsty and they had not even found the promised land yet. I wonder how God felt when he saw his people make a golden calf and worship the golden calf instead of worshiping him. I wonder how God's people felt when God gave them the 10 best ways to live. I wonder how God's people felt when they could finally see the promised land. I wonder if there's any part of this story we could leave out and still have all the story that we need.